What's up YouTube? Capital G here, talking about what I personally believe is the only card in Yu-Gi-Oh! That can save this absolute dumpster fire that we call our competitive meta in the TCG, and why it is time for that card to come off the Forbidden and Limited list and at unlimited status. By the way, just a quick side note, does anyone actually like this meta? Because I'm kind of getting the general consensus from the Yu-Gi-Oh! Community that this meta is trash and no one really enjoys it. So I kind of feel like this is definitely one of the things that can improve that. The card I am talking about in this video is Maxx C, and I understand that it is a controversial topic and card and a very divisive card in the Yu-Gi-Oh! Community. So, I expect a bunch of dislikes on this video, but whatever, that's just part of the job. I actually think that when you look at Maxx C historically, to me it kind of feels like it's a card that's become more divisive and more controversial as it moved down the ban list. Like, you guys remember when Maxx C was at 3? I don't really remember all that much complaining about it, but when Maxx C went to 2 and then the 1, I felt like the complaining just kind of ramped up and it just became louder and louder. And actually, I guess maybe they saw this in the OCG where Maxx C has been at 3 forever, and then they did have that one ban list where they put Maxx C at semi-limited status, and then they immediately put it back on their next ban list to 3. So, maybe that's kind of a hint that the lower Maxx C goes, the worse things actually get. I feel like the card should have just always stayed at 3, and that one, it became a little too luck-sacky. Anyways, let's go ahead and talk about some of the reasons why I believe that Maxx C should come back and why I think it should just go straight to 3. Number 1, let's just tackle the elephant in the room. Combo decks are out of control, and the ceiling for these combo decks is just way too high. I've always talked about it, but I'll bring it up again. An archetype like Medoche, where, I love Medoche, they're cute, they got such colorful and vibrant artwork, but come on, Medoche has a 1 card plus 11 that can easily OTK you. And when you really look at the format right now, you look at a card like Crystron Halifibrax, that's basically the heart and center of this entire terrible format. And I would argue that, Halifibrax into Auroradon is basically like what they had in the OCG with Needle Fiber and the Summon Sorceress, how it kind of defined the entire Yu-Gi-Oh! Metagame. And every deck just kind of revolved around going for that play as quickly as possible. We have the same exact thing in the TCG, just with, a different Link monster that's, giving you tokens instead of summoning another monster from your deck. But it's the same exact basic angle. We know this play. We know that every deck right now is trying to use it. Some decks can do it for 1 cards, whether it be summoning a lefty driver, righty driver, tour guide, whatever you want. You basically can do this with 1 card, and you end up with a bunch of negations on field, usually enough to stop over half of your opponent's opening hand. And it's like, really, I don't understand how exactly that's fun. Furthermore, it feels like right now, that there's a problem with these combo decks when most players are main decking anywhere. Well, to combat the combo decks, they're generally main decking anywhere from like 9 to 15 cards that are specifically, used to like go second, whether it just be the Kaijus, the Dark Ruler No Mores, the other cards like Super Polymerization. When you're doing all of that, doesn't that kind of signal that the combo decks are a little out of control and they really don't put a lot of resources into their actual combo? It's just like 1 or 2 cards ends up with a board of like 6, 7 negates. Like, that's just kind of ridiculous. I feel like Maxx C would definitely ease some of the pressure with that. Also, I got to talk about Nibiru, and I know some people might be like, Cap, why are you talking about Nibiru? But I think that Nibiru's entire creation was essentially supposed to address a problem that Maxx C was already tailor-made to kind of deal with. If you look at Nibiru, as good as it is, it's just not really getting the job done. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that we as players in the TCG found ways almost instantly to circumvent Nibiru's effectiveness. Whether it be, the summoning Appaloosa as your 5th summon. You guys know that was a notorious play. A lot of people, when they were looking to combo out with, some of the combo decks that maybe even aren't as popular right now, like Black Dragon, Burning Abyss, they would always go for like Appaloosa as their fifth summon. Thus, the Nibiru was essentially turned off, like, oh yeah, you can use the Nibiru, but I'm just going to negate it anyways. And then we also have other options like Kwakumiru Guardian, which you can play in like Adamantimators. You got Borreload Savage Dragon, which is a card that it's become stupidly easy to make because of Auroradon and Halifibrax. You've got Mystical Beast King Jackal, and just a whole bunch of different answers. These are all cards that basically stop Nibiru, or, you know, we can even look forward when the Don 1000 cards come out, and you'll be able to go into Appaloosa for just, you know, Numeron Network, or you'll be able to go into things that aren't even affected by Nibiru, like the Infinite Track Megaclops. That's another card that just basically laughs at Nibiru. Like, okay, you summoned your Nibiru, but my guy's unaffected, so it doesn't really do anything. So I feel like Konami went out of their way, Jerome Mikel, to create Nibiru to basically stop your opponent from wombo comboing, special summoning all over your face. Anytime that you're summoning more than 5 times in a turn, we know that you're doing something broken in Yu-Gi-Oh! And although Maxx C kind of stops these same cards, it just feels like Nibiru, there are so many easy ways for us to kind of cheat around it as players. Like every good deck outside of maybe a couple of them, hell, actually with the new trap hole out, like basically every deck has a way of just saying, no Nibiru, we can stop you by the time that you're actually going to be able to kick in. We'll have an answer and we'll be able to just stop you, so you're not actually going to be effective. We basically adapted to Nibiru way too quickly. So I guess Nibiru really, as great of a card as it is, it feels like it's just not actually getting the job done. One other huge point that I want to talk about with Maxx C, and this is something that it might be a little difficult for TCG players to handle because the game was so drastically different, or at least the meta was back in February 2018 when Maxx C got banned. It might just kind of be hard to look at Yu-Gi-Oh! As it is right now and think that things are a little different. And that is the fact that there is actually some risk to main decking Maxx C. Maxx C is not just a card that you can just throw 3 copies in any deck and think, oh man, every time I draw this card, it's an instant win button. That's just not how it is. In fact, the OCG is telling us that, because in the OCG, Maxx C isn't even a staple anymore. I'll talk about that a little more in a second, but a lot of these heavy control decks, whether it be Guru, Ultrageist, El Dorado, Sky Striker, these are still decks that no matter what you think of them, you still have to think that they're at least somewhat legitimate. Tier 2, maybe tier 2.5 at the worst. They can still easily beat you. These decks were non-existent back when Maxx C got banned, and it could be because, you know, cards like Guru and Multi-Faker weren't even released then, or Dark Saviors, which had Sky Strikers obviously, like that pack had not even been released. So back then in February 2018, the entire meta was just nothing but combo decks. You had Pendulums that still had like 3 Jokers, you had Firewall Dragon at 3, Spiral didn't have any ban list hits, so you can kind of understand essentially what the meta was like. The meta was just, you know, press green and go, basically 3 firewalls and you can just combo out for days. There really wasn't any type of control decks unless you were running into that one random True Draco player at like your locals or something like that. So essentially it meant that Maxx C was good against everything. But now if you look at the game, if you do happen to run into a Guru or, you know, a Sky Striker matchup, maybe an El Dorado deck, there's a good chance that at best you might draw like 1 card off of Maxx C, and it's not going to be anything that kind of moves the needle or puts you in some serious advantageous position that maybe you would have thought about if you were playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Back when Maxx C was at 1 and it got banned. I mean, you thought every time I got Maxx C back then, I automatically won the game, but really that's just not how it is. And to that point, as I mentioned earlier, the OCG has had 3 Maxx C since forever, and when you look at the decks that are doing well over there, you look at the deck lists that are topping, no one's really main decking 3 Maxx C. Like, the players in the OCG understand the risks that come with the card. They understand, like, hey, if I run into the Numeron, you know, El Dorado deck, at the very best, maybe I'm going to draw 2 cards. At worst, it could be dead for a couple of turns. If I run into like an Invoked El Dorado deck, I might be drawing like 1 card because Invoke really doesn't special summon much outside of maybe like a Makaba turn 1 if it's not going for the S0 combo. So I think that we have to understand that there are some level of risk to throwing Maxx C into a deck, especially as I said before, if you're just going to take 3 copies of Maxx C and throw it into everything, like, don't be surprised if there are certain matchups where you're not getting any value out of it. And I don't largely consider counters to a card a good reason to consider that card balanced or anything, because when you really think about it in Yu-Gi-Oh, like basically every card in the game has something that can stop it, unless it's like, you know, a super polymerization card. It's like a spell speed 4. But we also have to acknowledge, and again, this is like one of those things where we got to look at the game where it was in February 2018 and then kind of adjust to new information, adjust to new cards that have been released, etc., etc. Let's talk about Called by the Grave. It is one of the easiest and most direct counters to most of the hand traps in Yu-Gi-Oh, and that's a card that in competitive Yu-Gi-Oh is probably one of the top 10 most popular cards in the game. Called by the Grave did not exist when Maxx C was legal in the TCG. When you used Maxx C back, you know, when it was legal in 2018, 99% chance it was just going to resolve. Now we've got this card that not only is good against, you know, graveyard-based archetypes, but also against most of the hand traps in the game, and a card that sees tons of play, and it can also just kind of wreck your Maxx C. And in addition to that, I feel like Called by the Grave creates this incredibly important and kind of interesting dynamic where if both players are in combo matchups and they're both playing Maxx Cs, you might not even want to use Called by the Grave on your opponent's Maxx C, because then you put yourself in a position where if you don't kill them, your Maxx C in your hand could be potentially dead. So I think that that could be a very interesting dynamic, but we do at least have to acknowledge that Called by the Grave was not actually legal, or it wasn't released because it came out in Extreme Force. It wasn't even released when Maxx C was still legal. So it's just another huge popular answer that we have in the TCG, let alone something like Ash Blossom, which is also probably like a top 3, top 5 most popular card in competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! Another card that actually answers, Maxx C. And eventually we will, like, in my opinion, I think eventually we will also get Crossout Designator, which would kind of be like a third way. And if you're running all 3 of those cards in the main deck, it feels like you have so many ways of answering Maxx C. But I feel like we just at least have to address that things have changed. You know, Maxx C does have more risk attached to it, whether it is bad matchups, or whether it is getting hit by a Called by the Grave or a Designator, or excuse me, a Crossout Designator, cards that just didn't exist. So honestly, guys, I feel like it's time for Maxx C to come back. Not come back at 1. I think that that would just be worse than it even coming off the ban list. I'm talking about coming back and putting the card fully at 3. And honestly, I don't see much of a downside. So I think that it is time, Konami, bring the card back to 3. When Maxx C was at 1, I felt like that was when complaining really was at its highest with the card, because it was at a time where there really weren't any control decks. They weren't viable. Everything was combo, and it really felt like if you just drew Maxx C before your opponent, you essentially had a win the duel card. But now that's really not the case, or at least I don't think so. Anyways, those are just my thoughts and opinions. You guys leave yours in the comment section below, and let me know what you think. Thank you guys for watching. As always, subscribe if you have not already, and turn on that notification bell for daily videos.